Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist. My name is Joel Goldberg. It is Thanksgiving week as we are recording this, and so I hope that everyone is doing well and safe. Got a lot to discuss coming up here on the podcast. First and foremost, want to thank my sponsors, Enterprise Bank and Trust, hashtag no stopping you. Enterprise Bank and Trust was founded by entrepreneurs with the core focus of serving privately owned small and medium-sized businesses who have a story to tell. Enterprise Bank's commitment is to listen, learn, and guide clients to a lifetime of financial success. Enterprise Bank and Trust, together there's no stopping you. My name is Joel Goldberg, coming to you from the Kansas City Audiovisual Studios. They create engaging spaces. Check them out at kcav.com. So as I mentioned, it's Thanksgiving week as we stream this live and we record for audio later on, which means that a lot of Americans, even with COVID, we all know about e-commerce nowadays, will be shopping from the comforts of their own home. And that means that I'm glad that my guest has just a little bit of time to take a break from the chaos of the busy season. Lori Coulter is a serial entrepreneur and the co-founder and CEO of Summersalt, a swimwear and apparel company. And anybody that knows me is going to say right now, what in the world are you doing talking about women's fashion and swimwear? And quite frankly, I have no business doing that, other than the fact that I love the conversation of entrepreneurship, and Lori and her company are truly a success story, one that continues to evolve. And so I'm really glad right now to bring in Lori Coulter. Lori, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me this morning.
It's good to have you. And I know that you and I caught up recently, and your company is just doing amazing things over the last few years out of St. Louis, but really some amazing background too in terms of data and analytics and your path, which I want to get into. But here's where I want to start with you, because I was reading through an article that was written, I think probably in a St. Louis magazine, and it said, and this was back in March, early March, the disruptive swimwear and travel brand named on CNBC's list of the world's most promising startups and featured in People, in Style, Elle, Forbes, and more, fresh off closing a Series B funding round, raising $17.3 million. And I read that and I thought, that was written just before the pandemic started. So how much have things changed in the last 7 or 8 months? Because I know that things have gone well.
So like everyone else, it's certainly been a roller coaster, managing everything from people working remotely to consumer demand, really almost overnight dropping. And then through the summer, the consumer demand came back and then some. And then over the course of the year, we've realized e-commerce really has tailwinds. And so while we had an amazing plan going into 2020, and we were actually executing well above that plan, which, is so exciting, and yet, I guess, a little bit frustrating because that plan has been redone 3 or 4 times ever since. So the good news is we've really benefited from COVID, when so many small businesses are struggling, and it's unfortunate. What is happening, we would never wish it on our worst enemy, but we feel like we're in the right place at the right time.
It's interesting though too, because I mean, I think if people were to have said to you, hey, this is going to happen and travel's going to stop and all this, I mean, you guys in part advertise yourselves as someone that is bringing comfort to women as they travel, and suddenly the travel world, the vacation world, swimsuits has all stopped. So if I were to have told you, say, a year ago this was going to come, what would you have freaked out or said, okay, we'll get this?
Well, I think, when we look at Summersalt's messaging, even from the very beginning, it was about inspiring a bit of joy and fun in her life, and particularly when she was wearing a swimsuit. And ironically, when you wear a swimsuit, you're typically traveling. You have an event, whether it's your your neighborhood pool or a trip to the lake or your bucket list trip to Bali, you're taking a swimsuit with you. And so Summersalt really was already in her suitcase. And at launch, and really the last couple of years, we've leaned into that messaging. But of course, with COVID, it just sounds completely flat and insensitive, really. And so this summer, we really leaned into the joy side of our branding and tried to be there for our customer to say, hey, listen, we know COVID's changed everything for you, but it can't take away joy, and it can't take away those small, kind of simpler moments in your backyard with your family. And so we leaned into that, and it really worked. And we're also leaning into that as we go into holiday. And one of the things we did really well, and again, is I think, looks brilliant in light of COVID, but in Q4 of 2019, we expanded categories. We launched sleepwear, we launched loungewear, have since launched activewear, and then everything cozy, comfy, knits, and sweaters. Ironically, those are all categories that are important during COVID, and that served us really well.
So let's go back a little bit to the start of Summersalt and your background too. Small town girl that makes it as a big time serial entrepreneur. I love asking this question to so many of my guests, but growing up in small town Missouri, what were your aspirations?
I think I always believed I was a business person at heart. And my first business, I sold, I didn't tell you this in the prep call, but I was the concessionaire at my brother's American Legion baseball games. And so I would literally buy my own inventory. They didn't have anybody else to do it. I would bring it all, hot dogs, crock pot, the whole thing. And so that truly was my first experience. But I was forever interested in business. And I knew that I would be an entrepreneur someday. I just didn't know what I would do. So.
And did you ever think it would come in the form of fashion, or no? Was that an interest of yours?
Yeah, no, I was always interested in fashion. In fact, my mother was the University of Missouri Extension Program clothing and textiles expert. And so she really, I think, brought that to my life at an early date. And it was always about making things for me. I love entrepreneurship. I love building businesses, but I equally love building products. And so it's that creative process over and over again that I think really excites me.
So this thing kind of came together the way you explained it to me. By the way, I had no idea that the start of your entrepreneurial career was at a Legion baseball game. Hey, if you could sell there on some of those hot Missouri afternoons or nights, that's awesome. But this is obviously taken off in a great way. And you were really explaining to me too about you and your co-founder and sort of the, maybe not coincidence that you came together, but this sort of came together in a nice, beautiful, organic way. Tell me about that.
So my co-founder Reshma and I are both serial entrepreneurs, and we met probably 5 years prior to founding Summersalt, but we were not personal friends and had not worked together. But I was really impressed by the work she was doing, had introduced her to several investors. She was working on another venture at that time. And in June of 2016, she and I met for lunch at Chipotle. It was not intended to be any sort of life-defining moment, but I think we were both at crossroads in our careers. I did not see a path to scale for apparel brands that were pursuing sort of a traditional wholesale model where you have multiple salespeople in the middle, maybe a licensee selling to major retailers, and then eventually selling to the customer. And certainly in light of COVID, retail is in a major moment of disruption. But that was happening prior to COVID. And Reshma owned a digital marketing agency and had been working with some of the larger direct-to-consumer brands on the East Coast, mostly venture capital backed. And she really challenged me to look hard at this direct-to-consumer business model. And by direct-to-consumer, I mean a brand that sells directly to their consumers, particularly digitally, and has that one-to-one relationship and community building that's important, I think, today, as opposed to selling through a major department store or another retailer. And so I looked hard at that business model. I went that was June of 2016 at Chipotle. I went away from that conversation, wrote the initial business plan and strategy for what is now Summersalt, and developed a collection. I think that what really separates entrepreneurs from everyone else. And I know, Joel, you're the same way. We all just do it. And I went back to hire Reshma's agency in December of 2016. Ironically, she declined my business, which is a funny part of our story. And she says she was in transition at that point, looking her for. But I never missed a chance to share that part. But we serendipitously ran into each other in New York in January of 2017. We were both at an event, and I'd been interviewing PR teams intent on marching towards launch, and I had the deck and the line sheet with me, and I shared it with her on the spot. And instead of saying, hey, I'll send you a proposal, she said, I'm interested, but would you consider a co-founder? And that's really how we came together. And it's certainly been a great partnership, and we're really both sides of the same coin. So.
I was going to ask you about that because you mentioned those words to me, two sides of the same coin. So between the strategy that you have, the branding that Reshma has, how perfect of a business marriage has that been? And what has that process been like in really taking your vision and hers too, and making this work with two people that knew each other, but may or may not have ever intended on doing business together? I mean, obviously, you two knew you enjoyed seeing each other at events or connecting and networking, that type of stuff. It's one thing to do that. It's another thing to stake your life and go into business with someone. So how has that partnership worked?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question for sure. And neither of us are particularly quick to make, rash decisions. I mean, we're very thoughtful, intentional people. And so the fact that we were both open to the idea, and I think we recognized we were really two very complementary skill sets. We realize today, I'm truly a business mind with a creative bent, and I think she would say she's a creative mind with a business bent. We actually, I had the physical product and supply chain down pat. She had the branding. Really, to this day, all creative for Summersalt has been done in-house. Everything from our logo to our website design to our emails, we manage ourselves, which is quite unusual for retailers. And so again, it was about we knew what we could do together. And this was truly an intentional partnership. And from my perspective, we're running, 10 times faster than we would run individually just because of those synergies.
When we were talking about all this, a couple of the words, I wrote them down that really struck me, because as you were talking about swimwear, and you use the word in describing women, sometimes in swimwear, as being at their most vulnerable. And you started talking about what you all do. No airbrushing, everything's positive, authentic. And it just struck me as you use those words, authentic or authenticity and vulnerability. These are words we hear about all the time in terms of success with entrepreneurship, with business. They're incredibly important characteristics in terms of leadership too. And so it just made me think, again, not knowing anything about swimwear and women's fashion apparel, that there's a message here. There's something greater than, hey, buy the new swimsuit. There is a feeling, there is a message there. Am I reading that right? I mean, how have you been able to connect with your consumers all over the country?
So I think it's been very intentional all along. Our goal was to really be there for our consumer, to inspire that sense of joy when she was in the swimsuit at her most vulnerable, as you mentioned. And I do believe consumers are very smart today, and social media has allowed sort of a view into influencers, to celebrities, to brands, sort of a backroom view into how things get done. And it's important for brands to reflect the values of the company consistently, and really, in our case, the values of the founders. And truly, we do believe that it's important to show women authentically, both in our imagery and our messages, and then also make sure those values are consistent across the board.
The other side to all of this is the fundraising and what you've been able to do. And look, I always view that as a skill that either you have it or you don't. That is not a world that I think that I should ever go into. I'm not comfortable with. Now, I could tell people stories, and I think I could do that well. But in terms of asking for money, that is not something I'm comfortable with. Trying to raise money right now for Big Brothers Big Sisters in a campaign, and I've been lucky enough to have some people that were generous to donate, but I've never been good at that. I can ask people for an interview. I'm good at that part of it. But you have had so much success in the different rounds. What have you learned along the way? One, and two, do you enjoy that aspect of it?
So I think no entrepreneur, no founder would tell you they love fundraising. If they're telling you that, they're not. They should be a professional fundraiser, right? So from that perspective, I don't hate fundraising. So I think that puts me in a batch of founders that has more success, just simply because I do like meeting people. I do like hearing their stories. I love to talk about Summersalt. And I do believe, in what we're doing over the long haul. And I don't think there's another consumer tech opportunity that is, matches Summersalt's long-term potential. So from that perspective, it's very easy to tell the story and to hopefully convey not only what we're doing for consumers, the good we're putting into the world, but also the investment opportunity. And so a couple of, really important learnings, I think, for everyone, is to note that, so first of all, I don't know if I shared this, but only 3% of venture capital goes to women founders. And there's many reasons. We're not going to solve that today, but there's a researcher out of Columbia in New York who essentially looked at the data and realized that women founders are asked, quote, prevention or risk mitigation questions 65% of the time. Male founders are only asked those risk prevention questions 35% of the time. And so it really impacts outcomes as far as fundraising goes. But the learnings aren't just for women, it's for everyone. It's always important to paint the biggest picture of what you're doing. So if someone says, hey, Lori, you're, what are you going to do with the inventory if it doesn't sell? That's a risk prevention question, right? But what they should be asking me is, if this style is a winner, how are you going to, multiply that 20 times? Because when you're talking to investors, they're looking for that upside, not the sort of protection of their investment. And so again, just pivoting to growth every time. And then the other thing to note, and it's like any sales process, there's always a lot more no's than there are yeses. And when you get that no, you just have to brush it off. We almost don't remember the no's, which is interesting. I think that speaks to sort of the founder mentality. And I always externalize it. It's not about us. They just don't, one, see the opportunity, or the timing is not right. And timing is really important from a fundraising perspective.
It's really interesting. And again, it's a reminder of the uphill battle that women have in the business world. Same for minorities. And I've talked so much about this on this show, not with every single guest, but when it applies. But you did mention that number to me, 3% to women. Now you add in the fact that we're talking about a female-owned business here in the Midwest and in St. Louis, very similar to a Kansas City. There's not a whole lot of attention from the coasts on what's going on in St. Louis. So how were you able to go out there and raise $17 million and $26 million and have all this success over and over again?
So first and foremost, I think the bigger numbers came after we had proof in the numbers. So it's just like baseball. You have the numbers, you get the big contracts, right? And so once we got beyond those initial rounds, the demand was there, and it was almost immediate and certainly validating from a venture capital perspective. But those early rounds were very hard to raise. So pre-launch, we raised money from angel investors here in the St. Louis region. We have a couple of really sort of true champions of the brand that made it possible for us to launch. And I think that's a common theme for entrepreneurs as well, finding those champions, but you never know where they're going to come from, right? It's really interesting who those supporters are. And then our seed round, which is typically the first institutional round for a venture capital kind of track company, was very difficult to raise. Only 3% of funding goes to women, 20% goes outside of Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston. And then probably 10% is for consumer and in the venture capital space. So really the odds were against us, but we found a champion on the VC side out of Omaha, Dundee Venture Capital. It's a small fund, invest at the seed stage. In the Midwest, they have an e-commerce background, the founders do. And so from that perspective, they understood what we were doing, which I think is key, like finding those people that understand the space and are like-minded and see the opportunity. And they wrote a term sheet for us and we negotiated. But what was interesting, after we had that term sheet, we had over 100 no's from investors to fill out that round. Now, in the end, everybody wanted in the deal. So that's also a good lesson, right? Like it's a lot of groupthink. And then when we closed the round, it was clear. I mean, we were just off to the races. We closed another Series A raise, a $6 million raise 6 months later, which was very quick with the blue chip kind of Silicon Valley investors in the deal. But again, we had to get over that initial hump to really get to really have the traction, and then the fundraising has been gets easier every round for us.
You got to get past that beginning, which is where so many are eliminated, right? I mean, they just never make it past there. And I can only relate, not only relate, but I look back to the start of my TV career, which was a gazillion years ago, but about almost everybody got out before they could get in because they couldn't find a yes. And there was only so much opportunity. Now, when you start talking about the money that people were trying to go for those first jobs, it was like, it was nothing. But everybody wanted to be on TV that was coming out of journalism school, and only a few got in. And if you were able to break that door down, then suddenly those other opportunities came. It has to be a strange feeling that to hear so many of those no's and then have them come back later and want a yes.
So that is really interesting, and Reshma and I think enjoy when that happens, secretly or not so secretly.
Yeah. There's no I told you so. There's just got to be a nice feeling of see, we had a feeling that we had something good here. But I wanted to ask you about that because you got that momentum going. This vision did start to play out. It's not as simple, though, as meeting the right people. And I mean, you have to have everything, obviously, correct. And you had that background in tech and data. How much has that helped you along the way, too, in the type of business that you're running and with the success that you're having online, too, to bring in that data element and the strategy and just your background in terms of those analytics?
So I think it's very critical to our long-term success, and it's not just having the ability to capture the data, but it's really about finding the insights, making them actionable, and then executing and doing that over and over and over again in an iterative way. Sort of borrowing from the best of tech startups and out of Silicon Valley, they embrace this idea of ongoing improvement and to do it in rapid iteration. And that's the difference between sort of the success we've seen with Summersalt. When we see something working, we lean into it, whatever that might be, whether that's product, whether that's digital advertising, whether that's messaging, whatever is working, we want to amplify it and continue to grow. And we prioritize growth significantly. So in some ways, we're 3.5 years old since launch. And in some ways, we are very advanced with regards to revenue and physical product. And those are areas where we see sort of moving the needle for us from a growth perspective. But in other ways, we're still like a young startup, and it's interesting from a stage perspective.
I'm smiling right now because I think somebody just went right outside of Lori's window to blow leaves or something like that. And that's just like such a pandemic 2020 thing. Somewhere where you were talking, my dog started barking and I was ready to, text, and I had to sit there and think, okay, are the kids home today? Are they Are they in school at home? Are they in school at school? Who's awake? Who's not? So I'm just smiling because, you know what, business in the world goes on here. And it's actually a segue to my next question, because I started off this podcast talking about how everything changed in March, and then Summersalt ended up thriving. What's been the biggest secret, not just for your success, but also for your team? I think you have, what, 50 plus people. How have you been able to make this all work and be able to find opportunity?
So what's interesting about our team is initially we had our customer support, we call it customer happiness. They were 100% remote from the very beginning. So we had all the remote tech tools in place for everyone pre-pandemic, which made it a lot easier to once we went remote. But we develop a physical product in a lot of them, and Reshma and I were all in on, hey, we're a fast-moving tech startup. We need to be together. We develop physical product. We've got to look at it. We don't see ourselves being sort of a remote team. That was our view pre-pandemic. And it became very obvious, you know, mid-March. Our space is beautiful. Our office is beautiful, but it's an open floor plan, typical of kind of tech companies, with no cubicles. I mean, nothing. It's just an open space, and it just was not safe for us to be in the office together on an ongoing basis. So we've been 100% remote ever since. A couple of things we did that I think are key to our success. One, we went immediately to a touch base every morning. Reshma and I typically touch base with the entire team, that excluding customer happiness, because they are mainly part-time. So our full-time team has a touch base every morning. It's essentially a 10-minute huddle. And so in some ways, because we do that, the communication has actually been better. And then we've done a lot more around sort of employee mental health, making sure we're celebrating victories, making sure we're recognizing work anniversaries and birthdays. And, you know, a lot of people are struggling through the pandemic, just emotionally. They have sick parents or sick, you know, children, or they have kids at home for remote school, which I've had myself. And so just trying to make sure we are there for them. The other thing we've done is really get creative. So for instance, on the physical product side, we route samples using courier services all over town to everyone's house, like daily, a couple times a day. And that's how we've been able to manage development through the pandemic. It's really interesting. And then just continuing to set the expectations that we're running at 110% speed day in and day out and loving it, and it's worked.
Well, it's amazing the success that companies can have as they pivot, as they embrace this. And, you know, as you were talking about this, and a little bit actually of what you had told me too about so many on your team just leaning into this. And I think you would talk to me about sending out inspirational messages, you know, having a text line during COVID. And you know, I have a podcast actually that came out today, those that are watching on the live stream, of a conversation that I had with Simon Sinek, and it was for the Hellsberg Entrepreneurial Mentorship Program here in Kansas City. So I shared a bunch of that conversation, which is up on iTunes and Spotify and all that. And he was talking about the different mindsets. He said that entrepreneurial mindset, which he described more of the playing the infinite game, which is his new book. It's not about the wins and losses. It's about the big picture stuff. He said that a lot of people like that just kind of dove into this and said, okay, there's a pandemic, let's figure this out, versus somebody that said, oh my gosh, we're losing and, you know, struggling with this. No one wants this pandemic. With that said, how much of that entrepreneurial mindset, Lori, enables you to thrive during a time like this?
Well, I think, you know, in the midst of disruption, there's always opportunity, right? A major shift in consumer behavior has occurred. We've had 10 years worth of adoption of internet shopping, right? E-commerce in 6 months. Most people do not believe that the consumer is ever going back to the days of, you know, really shopping solely in store. Most malls are likely to lose about 35% of their stores in the next 18 months, which I think is just a devastating statistic but that doesn't mean the consumer won't be shopping. She just will be shopping online. And so in the midst of all that chaos and disruption is really the time when brands are defined for the next 50 years. And we do believe that the apparel brands in particular of the next century will be defined in the next 18 months. And so Summersalt is acting, essentially opportunistically to make sure that we are there for our consumer. You mentioned Joycast, which is our customer support hotline that we launched. We essentially repurposed our customer happiness team and text-based customer support line to really send our consumers who are interested, if they texted us, we would send them a sort of inspirational clip in the midst, like the depth of lockdown, whether that was a grandmother waving goodbye to a school bus in the morning, or an opera singer in the middle of Rome singing from his balcony. Really inspirational moments during the pandemic. It was so important because it was not going to lead to commerce, but one, it was good for our team, and two, I think it showed the consumer, hey, we know where you are, and we kept that kind of community side of the brand going, even though we knew she wasn't going to be buying a swimsuit and maybe not anything for a long time.
It's a brilliant idea, and I think that just so many people wanted to be connected at that point, and we may be going back through that again. So really, really smart strategy on your guys' part. Time now for our baseball themed questions, brought to you by Kissick Construction, trusted team, reliable partner. Check them out at kissickco.com. Okay, professionally speaking here, and Summersalt is still somewhat new, but you've been at this in the world of entrepreneurship for a long time. So what is the biggest home run that you have hit in your career?
So I'm going to talk about just one physical product. There are a lot of home runs, but our one shoulder one piece, our side stroke, is absolutely the best designed product I've put out in my career, and certainly has been a favorite for consumers from the very beginning. And sometimes you just have products that are truly hero products. They work for a lot of different people. And I think our consumers, have certainly responded. And it's one of those viral kind of products. And I know you're probably not aware, but given your fashion expertise, it's a real winner for sure.
I'd like to say, by the way, I do take pride in what I wear on TV and all that type of stuff, but we're talking about swimwear here. And if I were to even pretend to fake my way through this, my wife would be bursting into the room or the studio or whatever we want to call this right now and call total BS on me. So I just want to be transparent in terms of that. But that, just a quick follow-up on that home run, that has to be just the most amazing feeling to see something that goes viral like that.
It's amazing. And also it goes back to putting positivity in the world. We make women feel good at the beach. They're able to dive in, engage with life, play with their children. If they want to lay by the pool, great. It's absolutely, what we set out to do. And the other, big sort of defining moment for that suit, the Today Show did a segment. They featured 3 different women, 3 different sizes, all kind of very different in their appearance. And they dubbed the side stroke the unicorn of swimsuits. And I think that kind of speaks to what we've done there.
Pretty nice validation when the Today Show is going to jump in, because there are a lot of people watching that every single day. Okay, how about a swing and a miss and what you learned from it?
So I think I'll go back to the fundraising example. It can get really discouraging when you have 100 no's in a row. And so that was 100 swings over and over and over again. But I think, it is really important to note that we did eventually get that first round closed, and then we continued to raise beyond that. And so I did see another founder speak during that time, and it was a guy, and he said, we talked to 100 different investors, and just hearing that from him made me realize, hey, it's not you, it's not your opportunity, that's just what it takes. And so that made a big difference for me personally, that I just got my mind around, you're just going to have to go through this. Don't worry about the no's. the yes will come when you get to the right group, and it did.
So it's a mindset, right? I mean, you got to a point where the no's weren't personal. It's just part of the game.
Right. And like I said, I really don't even think about the no's or have memory of who said no or yes. I didn't know who said yes, but not the no's. It doesn't really impact, I guess.
Last baseball themed question, small ball. What are the little things that add up to the big things?
So I think, a lot of times people will see Summersalt and think, wow, they've had a ton of success, but it really is about all the details. And particularly on the physical product side, in my prior business, we'd scanned over 10,000 women and made a swimsuit for each of them. So we had that data-backed fit, to your point. We hold that fit and make improvements on it on an ongoing basis. So we look at our sort of returns portal information when the consumer comes back to us and returns. We see her comments, her feedback by size, by color, and we make adjustments. So it's, again, that iterative process on an ongoing basis that gets us to that home run eventually. But it's like that across the business. On the marketing side, we're testing imagery, ads, copy, on an ongoing basis to make sure that we're putting the best possible version of Summersalt into the world. And it really adds up to the bigger picture. And I do think the founder's job is to really be able to go deep, to identify what details matter, and then also to come back up and be high level from a strategy perspective as well.
All right, 4 final questions as we round the bases. First one, growing up in a small town in Southwest Missouri, Monette, right? Monette, Missouri. You told me this, but I love the answer. Well, one, what was it like growing up in that small town, and what did they vote you most likely to be?
Oh, this is funny. So it was a great sort of, fairy tale like childhood. And I think one of the things, small towns do a lot of things right, but I never put any sort of limits on my own abilities or long-term potential. And I think it was very progressive of my classmates to vote me most likely to be a Wall Street tycoon my senior year of high school, which I don't think tycoon is a thing now, which kind of dates me, but it is funny.
I don't know that anybody uses the word tycoon anymore, but right? But it was when we were growing up. I mean, it's a good title to have. I think I view someone as building empires. So you're working your way there, along with your co-founder. So that's going to be my second question as we round the bases. When Reshma turned you down, and you said you kind of, I know you're not giving her a hard time over that, but you certainly have that ability. How much have you guys, or did you guys joke about that after the fact? Because obviously the right choice was made.
I mean, every time we tell the Summersalt story, I mention it. So we laugh about it. And we had some other sort of funny moments in there where I dropped by her office, I sent her emails, like I wasn't giving up. And she and her team were my first choice to do the brand work for Summersalt. For obvious reasons now, it's, I think we have an amazing brand and so glad it worked out.
Okay, third question as we round the bases. I saw in one of the write-ups, or maybe it was something that you had said to me. I think it was something you said to me about giving people, especially women, and you talked about this a bit with the swimsuit, sitting at the pool, hanging out with the kids, the confidence and all that, as having that childhood joy is the way that you described it. And it just struck me as you said that I so often hear in Kansas City, the Royals general manager talking about, we want players that play the game with childhood joy. It's like we all have so much going on in life. There's so much stress. That's true for these baseball players. That's true for all of us that are running businesses. And sometimes it's nice when you can just go back and say, you know what, I want to enjoy things in that innocent way that we did as kids. How important is that for your messaging and that feeling that you're trying to convey to your customers?
So I think so much is tied up in a swimsuit about our bodies as women. And so if we can get back to sort of those earliest days where we just went to the beach and just had fun, and engage. And more importantly, if we can teach our daughters to do that, right? And so that's what's important to me. It's about putting the best sort of part of Summersalt at the forefront and making sure that we, instead of, doubling down on, overtly sexy, which is how swimwear had been done for so long, which, by the way, looks really tired and old on social media. It does not work. I think, we really had an opportunity, and again, it was about timing, to present a brand in a new, fresh way, and it's so rewarding to see that it's working.
So that leads me to my last question, and it's I guess a bigger question, but one, how will that world continue to change? Because now we see all types of people from diverse backgrounds, whether it be based on skin color or gender or body types in terms of the fashion world. And everything is becoming more normal, right? Before, when you were growing up, when I was growing up, it had to be that perfect looking model. And that's just the way things were done, right? I mean, you talked about that type of look. And now there's so much more inclusion. So the two-part question for me is, one, how do you see that continuing to evolve? And two, how do you see Summersalt's role in that going forward?
Yeah, so from the very beginning, if you look at our pre-launch, social feeds, you will see that we featured women of all backgrounds, ethnicities, sizes, ages. It was important for us to be inclusive, even really before, I think it's becoming almost trendy. Yeah. And for us, it was just, again, going back to making sure that women saw themselves in our imagery, or maybe not themselves, but their really chic next door neighbor, their good friend that they aren't afraid to bring in the dressing room. And for us, it's about authenticity. It's who we are as founders. I grew up in a small town in rural Missouri. Reshma grew up in Mumbai, India. And so we could have come from more different backgrounds, but it's the sense of joy, the sense of adventure, the sense of fun that binds us. And it's really, I think, who binds our consumer as well.
Well, there are a lot of good things coming. In the long term, a lot of good things coming. I know that in the short term, the busy season is beginning, right? And so if people want to be able to see any of the lines on Summersalt, all of the apparel, they can do it so at summersalt.com. Summer spelled like the season of the month, summer. So SUMMERSALT.com. That the best way for people to start looking? And
that's the best way. And just know we have everything. We will take care of your baseball loving and non-baseball loving too, guys. We have tons of amazing gifts, and you will thank me later. And make sure to choose our gift wrap option, because the gift boxes are beautiful. They're usable long term and affordable too.
I'm proud to say that I have a very diverse audience, but for the guys that are out there that are watching or listening, you are saying, Lori, that you can make us actually look. See, the problem is then my wife's going to say, okay, who helped you with this? Yeah, hey, whatever. As long as we get it right, that's a good thing. Last thing, final follow-up before I let you go. Long term, in terms of success and growth for Summersalt, where's your head at right now?
So I'll just go back to sort of my comment earlier around retail being in an absolute moment of change. There's never been more disruption. And what's exciting about that is Summersalt's really poised to be the go-to brand for our generation of consumers. So that true lifestyle brand. And I think there's many that are sort of generation defining before us. But we don't like to say, hey, we're like so-and-so. We really, are going to be that body positive, inclusive brand that serves your entire wardrobe for the next 100 years.
I love it. You guys are off to a phenomenal start, and I know much, much more good to come. Summersalt summersalt.com. Lori, have a very productive, certainly happy and healthy holiday season. It's great to catch up with you. Thanks so much for spending the time today.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it, Joel.
All right, that is Lori Coulter, the CEO or co-founder of Summersalt, and it was great to be able to visit with her. Definitely check them out again at summersalt.com. And if you're a guy that doesn't know anything about fashion like me, or you're looking for a gift for your loved one, for your wife, for your daughters, whatever it might be, I would recommend going to Summersalt. Shout out to my sponsors, Kansas City Audio Visual, Kissick Construction, and Enterprise Bank and Trust. Businesses often come to Enterprise Bank because they demand and frankly are worthy of more than the status quo and need a local partner who understands their business. You can reach me at joelgoldbergmedia.com. Thanks for listening to Rounding the Bases, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. #NoStoppingYou. My name is Joel Goldberg. I hope to catch you next time.